Welcome to our presentation today on homelessness, property business owners' rights. I'd like to thank you for joining us. My name is Shelby Wood, and I work for the City of Westminster in the Department of Economic Development. My job is to manage our small business resource programs here at the city, including developing and coordinating training opportunities like this one. As we go through our presentation today, questions are always welcome. We are going to ask if you have those, if you could hang on to them until we get to the end of our presentation. We have plenty of time set aside at the end of the webinar to go through, do a Q&A and to make sure that all your questions get answered. If you were worried about forgetting your question before we get to that point, definitely feel free to use the chat. You can drop it in there. We'll circle back through anything that's in there when we get to the end as well, again, to make sure that we answer all of those for you. We have three presenters today. They have made themselves available to also answer any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have at the conclusion of the webinar. We do have a contact slide at the end of the presentation that has their email, their phone numbers. So please definitely take advantage of reaching out to them if you do want or need more information. We will also, at the end of this webinar today, since it is recorded, we're going to put a copy of the recording and the presentation up on our training library that is up on our westminstereconomicdevelopment.org website for reference. Now, the purpose of our webinar today is to share more about homelessness. We have joining us Senior Management Analyst Kate Scarbeck, Code Enforcement Supervisor Logan Morley, and Police Sergeant Brian Hippelman, who are going to share information and resources around the issue of homelessness here in Westminster and your rights as a property or business owner. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to them.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Kate Scarbeck with the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Libraries. Next slide, please. So I'll be covering overall the homelessness scope. How large of an issue is it? What are the causes and what actions can be taken on different types of land is what we'll be discussing predominantly throughout this session today. Next slide, please. So there are multiple federal definitions of homelessness. The ones that we are largely talking about today are the people who are living in a place not meant for human habitation, or in emergency shelter, or in transitional housing, or are exiting an institution where they temporarily resided. Next slide, please. There are, however, other definitions of homelessness that oftentimes wind up leading to homelessness. And so want to cover that very quickly here. So in the city of Westminster, according to this year's point in time count that was conducted, it's an annual census taken nationwide of people experiencing homelessness. On that night in January, we found 198 individuals, women, children, men, living outdoors or in vehicles or staying in hotel rooms paid for by an agency. We also know that based on eviction numbers in the courts, that there's at any given time in Westminster, roughly 2,100 people potentially being evicted for financial reasons and sometimes for behavioral reasons, but largely we're seeing an increasing number that are simply financial. They're not able to keep up with the cost of living. Then we also have 452 pre-K through grade 12 students who are unstably housed, according to the Department of Education. This number is likely higher. This number is actually from the 2021-22 school year. And if you'll recall that school year, it was students who were, some of them were still participating in classroom exercises remotely, some were in person, some were hybrid. And so it was really difficult for the school districts to determine which students were more unstably housed than others. Also with the free lunch program being just automatically provided to everyone during COVID. Families who were financially strapped weren't necessarily applying for that program in the way they have in the past. So it also made it more difficult for the school districts to identify. Prior to COVID, we had 1,000 students meeting the criteria of being unstably housed, meaning that they were living in doubled or tripled up situations, or for financial reasons, or that they were actually living outdoors or in vehicles with their parents. We also have an unknown number in any given year who are fleeing domestic violence and or about to. Domestic violence frequently leads to homelessness. Next slide, please. One of the reasons that domestic violence frequently leads to homelessness is that if you have a couple and both are working in order to afford housing, if they stay together, even though their relationship has frayed to the point they really shouldn't still be together, oftentimes it will lead to violence in the home. But they're staying together because it's the only way they can afford housing. And once they break apart, as a family unit, as a household unit, then they are not able to independently afford housing on their own. And so this slide shows that in the Denver metro area, fair market rent, it takes an adult earning $34.83 an hour in order to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment in the Denver metro area. And so if somebody's earning less than this, or if a couple's earning less than this, they're not able to afford housing in the Denver metro area. And in fact, over half of people in the Denver metro area are not earning enough to afford housing on their own. So we're seeing an increasing number of households that are doubled and tripled up. Next slide, please. In the reality of what can we do with the housing market we have, and wages having not kept up with the housing market, or the housing market having zoomed well past the housing wage, the employee wages, whatever way you choose to look at it. The city has been working to prevent homelessness by building and preserving the affordable housing units we do have in the city of Westminster. That work comes largely out of the Economic Development Department, which Shelby is a part of. We do provide rental assistance. We've done it through COVID and CARES Act funds and the American Rescue Plan funds. We also make home dollars that are federally available to Westminster, available for rental assistance. And we will be rolling out rental assistance funds that are from local tax dollars aimed at preventing households without children from becoming homeless, because there are federal funds available to assist families with children. Those are known as the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families funds, and those are distributed through nonprofit agencies and human services agencies. But there are, outside of COVID relief funds, there have been traditionally zero rental assistance dollars available for any household without children, which is 78% of the households in Westminster. So the city will be launching that later this year. We do provide Colorado legal services for free for tenant landlord remediation, and to help tenants prevent an eviction from showing up on their record, which would then prevent them from being able to apply for or receive housing anywhere in the Denver metro area for the next 7 years. We also have a co-responder program through our police department. So anyone who's experiencing mental illness symptoms and or substance use, co-responders are available to help refer people into the services that they so definitely need, whether they're housed or unhoused. And then when it comes to literal homelessness, we also work with more than 100 partners across the Denver metro area who help in finding as many supports as possible for people who are living outdoors and in vehicles. The city does have 2 homeless navigator positions that have been able to get over 80 households housed, and those were people who were living on the streets or in vehicles. it takes a long time to get someone housed in this housing market, unfortunately, that there just aren't a lot of affordable units available. So it does take time. So we do provide bridge housing for those clients who have received housing vouchers and are now embarking on their 4-month search for housing that works for them, that's close to their place of employment or schools for the children. We do provide bridge housing in hotels. We also have a portion of the funds used for hotel stays are also used for severe weather stays. We also distribute funds, the navigators do, from hotel stays through the severe weather activation plan in Adams County as our emergency sheltering option during the winter months. We do have a wellness court so that anyone who's appearing in court for crimes that are related to mental illness and or substance use can receive supports and treatment as part of their restitution to the community for whatever crime was committed. And we do have camp protocols that are in place. Shelby, would you go ahead and switch to the next slide? And this is known as our continuum of compassion. So anyone who is staying, I'm only talking now about the middle graphic, the middle line of the graphic here on public property. If someone is staying on parks, recreation, and libraries, open space properties, or in parks, the park rangers do connect with them. They do see if they want services. If someone is amenable to receiving services, our navigators will work to connect them to services throughout the area. And as long as they are continuing to work toward getting housed eventually, they are, under federal law, allowed to stay on parks, recreation, and library property, but they do have to comply with what the park rangers are telling them needs to be done. If an individual refuses services, then the park rangers are then able to issue trespass notices. This is a very different procedure, and it takes a lot longer than what you'll be hearing about from Sergeant Brian Hempelman and Logan Morley from our code enforcement, because on private property there are, and on public property other than parks, recreation, and libraries property, there are other protocols in place that do move a lot more quickly than what we are able to do on parks, rec, and libraries land. Shelby, next slide. And I think it's transitioning over to Logan.
Yeah, hi there, everyone. I'm Logan Morley. I'm the Code Enforcement Supervisor for the City of Westminster, Colorado. We've got a couple of slides here. Next slide, please. So as Kate just alluded to, it's a little different when working with private property. And a lot of this goes through code enforcement, and there's kind of a handoff with the police department in several of these instances here. So first off, just protecting your private property and kind of proactively or preemptively doing so. There's a few things you can do here. So, obviously avoid confrontation and maintain a safe distance from homeless individuals if possible. Do not offer food or money, as it may encourage more panhandling. We have seen that. So if you're offering things that just encourages that panhandling, so try not to do that. If you're inclined to help, just go through donations to local charities, missions, and things like that. Do not permit anyone to camp or loiter on your property. You want to be pretty quick and proactive about responding to, if you've had one individual or a tent or two, to contact, code enforcement, police department, work with us to kind of move them along, trespass them. We try to do that in a compassionate manner. Brian Hempelman and the team in PD are very good about being compassionate, communicating with folks. Nothing is ever strong-armed. It's very, very, polite, compassionate. We try to work with those individuals to move them on and move them along. It just goes a long way to not allow individuals to store shopping carts, bedding, or other personal belongings on your property. That can get set up. Those possessions can set up pretty quickly. You can go from, an individual just say crashing under a tree for a little bit to 2 or 3 more individuals, tents, bedding, sometimes stolen possessions or things that just make their way to that spot. And then it becomes, obviously a trickier issue and a little more difficult to move folks along once they really get set up. Where allowable, you definitely want to restrict access to sidewalk overhangs, alcoves, sort of habitats where people are a little more safe or out of the weather, because that's just an attractive nuisance or attractive issue for camping, loitering, and further setting up. Next slide, please. So, again, going into more on protecting your private property, you want to establish and post and make it very obvious any enforceable rules of conduct, that it's private property, just period. That goes a long way, just saying, hey, this is private property, no loitering, no camping allowed. So make that obvious, put signs up. You want to include any applicable curfews, nighttime curfews, prohibitions on loitering, drinking alcoholic beverages, any of that, drug activity. So, but primarily private, making something obvious that it's private property. That's not always the case. We don't see signs up on a lot of private property, especially if they're vacant lots or maybe future development lots. We have a few of those in the city where they look like just kind of open space or parks areas when they're not. So if you just get up some private property signs, that goes a long way. You want to lock and or remove handles from water spigots. Keep all trash in dumpsters and within the dumpster enclosures. We do tend to see dumpster enclosures not locked up at times, and those can be used as shelters. And you'll see that can attract debris, trash from elsewhere, individuals that are using them as essentially small encampment areas. So you want to lock up those enclosures. Definitely secure outside storage sheds, containers, lock or turn off all power outlets. That's a big attractor. Sometimes you won't even know about things maybe on an exterior wall or the backside of a property, or power ports that are available publicly that you may not be aware that are on. So be sure things are switched off or locked up if it provides power or water. Those will be attractive to people making their way through or maybe setting up camp. Definitely lock gates after hours, and install, if you can, and if it's applicable and fits your property, motion activated exterior lighting after hours. We've seen that be pretty useful in keeping folks moving along. Next slide, please. So, and then obviously properly trim back any landscaping to eliminate hiding places and provide site visibility. We've seen people we call upcutting trees, but 3 or 4 feet off the ground. If it's a well-established and healthy tree, you can kind of upcut the limbs so that it's a little more visible, a few feet up. And then, bushes, hedges, tall weeds, vegetation. We've seen some areas that are 4, 5, 6 feet or higher vegetation, and it allows a very easy kind of hideaway spot to set up camp. So if you keep some of that vegetation cut back, it just makes it tough to set up and have privacy so folks move along. Keep property obviously free of trash, litter, and debris. We have seen areas that there's just, things can blow across a property, especially if it's, like I said, undeveloped vegetation kind of areas, future development sites, and it will give the impression like you're not present or ownership or management's maybe not around or paying attention. And it could just be a windstorm blows debris across something and it looks like it's abandoned and a perfect spot to maybe set up camp for an individual looking to do so. So keep things free of that litter and trash. You can always enhance landscaping on a property to keep vandals away from areas that might be vandalized. That you can put flower beds in. You can make something more than just typical vegetation, green grass growth, and you can do things that make it look a little more, beautified or make it obvious. Yep, someone owns this property and they're around, they're present, they're taking care of the area. You can design obviously amenities to discourage misuse. So that would be like shaping benches that can be sat on but not slept across. So benches that might have multiple armrests across the middle of them. So it just discourages loitering and sleeping on those. Next slide, please. So, and this might be more elaborate for a few properties than others, but installing security cameras, just like the light sensors and sensor lights. You could do security cameras to cover public areas or even areas, obviously, inside a larger, private, parking area or a lot. Use graffiti-resistant paint or anti-graffiti coatings if you can on the sides of buildings or fences. Kate and I have spoken about this too, and Brian and I. There's not always a correlation, obviously, between graffiti and homelessness. It tends to be kind of two separate issues happening that just happen to happen in areas that are kind of magnets for both. So you might have homeless folks setting up, and if the property doesn't have a lot of management or people coming by and maintaining it, it makes it a magnet for just vandals to pop by and go, well, no one's keep an eye on this area. I'm going to hit this wall with some graffiti. And we've seen there is graffiti resistant paint that can be power washed and it just comes right off very easily than it would if it was a regular paint. So, and just to clarify who to contact and on what level here, if you are the private or a private property business owner or homeowner with concerns about persons experiencing homelessness on your property, you definitely would want to contact the Westminster Police Department as quickly as you could, and that would be their non-emergency dispatch line that's noted here, the one ending with a 4360. So if it's an emergency, obviously 911, you know, that's a no-brainer. But if it's just an issue, you've seen someone set up, it's a weekend's gone by and they're there, you just call that 303-658-4360, and non-emergency dispatch will get you routed and get a call out to someone like Brian Hempelman or others in PD to follow up and trespass those individuals and work with you on that. If you're an individual or just a passerby or someone concerned about homelessness and you spot it somewhere, you'd want to report that to code enforcement at our 303-658-4432, or you can email us at that email you see down there. And then we largely, there's a bit of that handoff. We will take calls that might be more PD, and we'll let them know, hey, someone, you know, a property owner called, but we're handing it off to you guys in PD. You might be a resident with a concern that might cross more into 911 levels, but you didn't know that, and so we'll be relaying that with PD. So there's no wrong door there. Brian and the team over in PD, they're about as good as it gets. They're really compassionate, really responsive. We work very well with them. So there's no wrong door there. Just you can't go wrong if you get it to PD and it's really something for code enforcement or leftover junk, debris, tents that maybe were abandoned. PD is going to reach out to us and we'll work to be sure we're abating things. We have community assistance funds where we can help with those abatements, those cleanups. They do get expensive. So there's this, I don't know if you'd call it a double victim kind of, not crime, but issue that happens where folks will move along, homeless will move along, but then there might be debris left over, and that is actually your responsibility as a property owner to clean that up. Now we run into a lot of issues where it could be a large encampment, it could be a lot of debris, and so us in code enforcement, we're actually working with those property owners to see if we can maybe help assist with our contractors to clean those issues up. So, you know, you can't, again, there's no wrong door there. PD or us, we'll figure it out and we'll be sure we're responding appropriately. So, and I think that's my last slide. I think it's off to Sergeant Hempelman here.
Afternoon, everyone. Sergeant Hempelman. I am the liaison for the PD, working with indirectly with Kate's crew. I do work directly with Logan. We work a lot, obviously, with the Parks Rangers, directly with them. So we kind of all have a good little team effort here. Firstly, the PD does not look at homelessness as a crime in and of itself. Now, we do realize that people experiencing homelessness do commit crimes, and that's what we're here for. We will usually get calls for service from businesses and private property owners in reference to things like unwanted party or trespassing, things like that, or fights and things like that. Those are things we'll respond to, but someone experiencing homelessness in and of itself is not a crime, so we don't deal with that as a crime. But like I said, we do deal with things with trespassing and unwanted parties, which is mainly what we deal with when we deal with people experiencing homelessness. What you would do, one of the things when you call the PD number, the non-emergency number, is calls get prioritized. Unwanted parties, trespassing, things like that are lower priority calls. They don't get stacked up in the high priority level, so that officers on the street are dealing with higher priority calls first, and then once those are resolved, they kind of come down into the lower level things of unwanted parties and trespassing and things like that. Now, if you have a fight going on or something like that, that would obviously make the priority a little higher, and you get more of a quick response on something like that. Next slide, please. What to do if you're having issues with people experiencing homelessness on your property. First and foremost, what we like to see from the PD, and I think on my nenext slide coming down here, we'll have an example of a letter. You can send me a letter trespassing, giving us authority to trespass people off of your private property. So that's what we're looking for. And I'll go to that a little bit more, but that's one of those things when we show up, we'll hopefully have you, the owner there, or someone that can tell us, hey, this person's not wanted, and we can either issue a summons, or we can make an arrest on private property. What we're looking for mostly is, like I said earlier, we have compassion with these people. Most of them will move along when we have a little conversation. It's not an issue. I think, like Logan said earlier, our biggest thing is that the cleanup is not completed. So we would move someone along, and some camp or tent or bedding will stay behind, and that's not cleaned up immediately. And that invites the next crew to come in, and that's kind of what we're seeing. We have people moving up and down the railroad tracks and up and down the highways that we're dealing with from other agencies and other cities. So that's kind of our issue. So if we can get that cleaned up immediately, that's a big deal. I talked about a little bit, when you call the non-emergency number, you'll tell them you have a trespass or an unwanted party. They'll ask for descriptions and things like that. And then we'll eventually get an officer down there, maybe two. If it's slower, you'll get a quicker response. But if it's busy out and we're shorthanded, that just understand that will be a lower priority call, and might take a little while to get to someone there. I think you see the non-emergency number there listed. Obviously, if it's some type of an emergency, give us a call on the 911. If someone's fighting or see something a little more violent going on, then give us a call. We can get a quicker response there. Next slide, please. So this is an example of our trespass authorization. This is a big deal. So when we have this, if you have your property, if you can describe it as much as possible, right? The curb's in play, the parking lot's in play, behind the business. Just describe it as much as you can in this letter. Also, we need someone to contact. So if we end up arresting someone, or we end up writing a summons to someone, we have to list someone as a victim. So we will need a name and a date of birth for the person, whoever's property it is. So if it's your property, it'd be your name, your date of birth, and then this letter describing the property, as descriptive as you can, and then authorizing us to write trespassing or arresting trespass people on your property. I think that's about it as far as I have.
Brian, I think we have a last slide here on how to help. Kate, was this something that you wanted to cover and wrap us up here at the end?
Oh, sure. We'll do that. Generally speaking, if you can just keep an open mind, I know Brian mentioned that people experiencing homelessness commit crimes, but they typically are nonviolent crimes. They're typically those trespassing crimes that we're actually focusing on in this session. So just be aware that they're not out to hurt you for the most part, and so just be compassionate toward them. And if you don't feel comfortable having them, call us for help. Reach out to the numbers that Logan and Brian shared. Support affordable and workforce housing. When there's a project being developed in your neighborhood or near your business, come out in support of that, because that's what people need in the Denver metro area, is places to live. Pay as high a wage as you possibly can, because that's what allows people to be able to afford to live in the area. Volunteer at homeless service agencies. There's many throughout the Denver metro area, and one probably close to where you live or work. Financially contribute to any homeless service providers. The ones that specifically serve Westminster include Almost Home, Access Housing, and Family Tree. Growing Home also helps with families who are experiencing that doubled and tripled up level of homelessness too. So just wanted to end on that note, that there are ways we can all help and contribute to solutions. And the ultimate solution for homelessness is housing. And so that's why our navigators work toward housing for all of the people that all of their clients that they're working with. And with that, Shelby.
Thank you. All right. So, as promised, last slide, contact information. So, emails, phone numbers for Kate, Logan, and Brian. My information is also on the first slide. I think you've heard it over and over again. All of us are here to help. We know that this is a complex issue with a lot of complex steps involved. And we have a wonderful group who is here to try to be the same word again, compassionate with people who are experiencing homelessness to try to help them in the best way that we can as a city. I hopefully have enabled everybody's microphones. If you have questions, definitely feel free to unmute and pose them to our panel. You are still welcome to drop those in the chat if you would rather do it that way. We've got 15, 20 minutes left to be able to address any of those. And again, this contact information, if you come up with a great question, comments, concerns later, you are definitely welcome to reach out to any of us for any of that. I am going to go ahead and wrap this up then. I'm still not seeing anything come over. So we are going to go ahead and say this is a wrap on our webinar today on homelessness, property business owners' rights. I'd like to send a huge thank you to our folks over in Parks and Recreation and Libraries, Community Development, and the Police Department for lending your knowledge and your time today to share about this topic. And for everybody who is watching this recording, I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.